things that really fascinates me is where you get your ideas from, like what inspired you to write a World War II story. And perhaps we'll start with Vicki with this one.
It's funny. I sort of, when I'm writing books, my ideas are often sort of ticking away in the background for months or possibly even years before I can form a story out of them. So, and for me, I used to really, well, I still do really love watching the black and white World War II films, and they were always focused on the men, but in the background you'd see the women, and in these RAF films you'd see these women standing around a table pushing blocks around with these long rolls. I used to think, what's their story? What are they doing? And so eventually, after sort of reading around the subjects, I found out what they did, and I really wanted to write their story, write about the women and what they did in the Battle of Britain and further on in the war as well. So yeah, that's where it came from.
Yeah, I think that's really good. What about you, Jane?
Well, Another You wasn't originally going to be a World War II book at all, but when I started researching the history of Studland, where I knew I wanted the book to be set, I discovered that it played an incredible part in the preparations for D-Day. And one of the exercises they had there went tragically wrong. And to me, that was a brilliant catalyst for the story. And they also had a lot of American soldiers there billeted around the area in the run-up to D-Day, and sadly a lot of them lost their lives in Omaha. So again, that spurred me on to make there a great big World War II content in the book.
So you're more inspired by the setting first of all, really?
Yeah, absolutely. It was the setting. I knew from more or less the first time I visited Studland, I wanted to set a book there. It's so beautiful and so remote while still being close to everywhere. It was just the place that spurred me on. And I always start like that. It's the same with Endless Skies. I started with a place, and the World War II content of that book came much, much later in the process.
Angela Barton, how about you?
I've actually written 2 women's contemporary novels, so I wasn't even thinking about writing historical fiction until I went to France, and I'd heard about this ghost village, which I was fascinated to go and explore. And when I got there, well, it was more like a small town. It was completely run down, derelict and deserted. They'd rebuilt it about half a mile away. So I visited this town that the Nazis had driven into on the 10th of June 1944, and you could still see inside the houses where obviously the furniture had rotted, but there was still, all the metalwork was still there, cars in the garage, household pots, and it was so moving. And I just started thinking about the families that would have lived there on that day, and that I felt compelled to help keep the story alive for future generations by writing what actually happened there through the eyes of a fictional character. But there's a huge weight of responsibility that comes with that, because I wanted to honour their last hours alive with honesty and respect, and so I had to choose my words very carefully. So I honoured them, and I didn't want to glamorise the story at all.
I think you did a brilliant job. I got goosebumps with you talking about it, actually, because I've read your story, and I think you've done such a brilliant and moving job of telling their tale.
Thank you.
Quite touching.
Thank you.
Angela Petch, how about you?
Well, I've read Angela's book too, and goosebumps have come back to me now. But I agree. My first book was actually inspired by my mother-in-law, who's Italian, and she was a war bride, and she married an English soldier, and she's now got Alzheimer's, unfortunately. But before she started to lose her mind, she told me lots and lots of her stories. And again, like Angela, you feel a weight of responsibility, but you want to get it right. You don't want to turn it into a history book, but you want to get the emotion and the ordinary person's experiences through. That's what I try to do in my books. They went through such a lot. I mean, we think we're going through a lot now, but I just think it's nothing in comparison to what they went through. So I self-published first of all, but and then I went with Bookouture, who got me to change a few things, but I didn't want them to change certain things, which were the reason I wrote the books. So I think that's something you have to sort of fight your corner when you're writing and justify why you're doing it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, Julie, did your inspiration come from family stories and things as well? How about you?
Yeah, both my parents joined up at 17. They were very, very young towards the end of the war. So my dad was in the army. He was actually at the D-Day landings. And there is a photograph that we think is him. It was on a TV programme and we managed to screenshot it. I've been trying to find it actually. But my mum, they were the best days of her life. She was 17. She went down to Gloucestershire where they trained the cooks. There was a lot of training down in Gloucestershire. And she trained as a cook. She cooked, she was a WAF. And in her wardrobe, there was always a big box of letters, which my sister and I used to sneak into and open. And they were from all the lovely boyfriends she had while she was actually there. And unfortunately, when she died when I was quite young, actually. She was fairly young. And my dad just got rid of all those letters. That was his way of coping, obviously, but I just wish we'd still got them. But they both used to talk about them. As you say, what they went through, those D-Day landings, you see these young men, 17, just landing, and some of them never even got onto the shore. So I always wanted to write something about it, and I have Madge. I mean, my mum was Marjorie, and James, my dad was James, and it wasn't their love story whatsoever. They didn't really get together until they came out of the war in those early 50s, really. But it was very much based on what they've told me about their lives during the war, and the good time that my mum had, really. Yeah. I wanted to write a story of passion, and my Holly Close Farm is about quite a passionate story between Midge and her James. So yeah, I feel it's one of my most passionate stories, actually.